Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here. We're talking NFL draft today. The draft is 6 days away from us as we do it. Fascinating storylines as regards or as pertains to the SEC. And let's start with Georgia, because I would watch Georgia. I would look at the stat sheet, and all year I was just thinking, how do we tell who did what here? Because they're all good. They all benefit from each other. And I was really interested to see how NFL draft scouts broke these guys down. And a lot of Georgia guys are going to go early in the draft. Maybe the biggest story is Travon Walker. He's really made a name for himself since the season ended.
Yeah, I mean, he has. And by the way, I appreciate you repping the Titans for this NFL draft edition of our video here. I've got my Rams sweatshirt on, and one is a defending champion, one is not.
One keeps disappointing in the playoffs, but
we won't go there. But by the way, I'm a gear guy. Like I just buy a lot of gear
are.
that I think looks good. So I know people have seen me wear a Titan sweatshirt before too, but I like gear that looks good. So there you go. But
I like teams for which I used to have season tickets. So
there you go. That makes sense too.
Right.
Yeah, I think the situation with Walker is interesting because, as we always know, going to these NFL drafts, plenty of rumors out there and plenty of reports, and it's how do you separate what's true from what's not? I don't think you ever can, because we know it's a lot of angling from teams that are trying to get that edge on someone, and I guess that makes sense with Walker, right? Talking about getting that edge, no pun intended. There's been a lot of discussion about him potentially going one to the Jags. Look, if that happens and it's not Aiden Hutchinson, I would probably be a little bit surprised, because I think that's kind of where we've all been at this offseason, of thinking that he was going to be the number one pick. But I wouldn't say I'd just be completely stunned, because I think Walker's someone, like you said, if you look at what Georgia did defensively last year, I think all of these Georgia guys have value. And it's just a matter of where do you put that value on them individually versus as a unit. And I think that's where this draft's going to get interesting. And I think you could see, maybe all four of these guys. I mean, I think you're definitely going to see probably three of these guys go in the top 15 or so. I think there's probably a chance all four could go top 20, 25, somewhere in there. I think Nakobe Dean will probably be the last one taken of that group of.
Isn't that crazy?
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like that's interesting to think about, isn't it? Because you've got Walker, Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, and Nakobe Dean. I think with how they're ranked, he's probably the last one of that group. But I mean, look though, there are more players, right? That you could talk about. You've got, I mean, even like on the offensive side, George Pickens is there, and there's other guys too. I mean,
Lewis Cine, man.
Yeah,
Lewis Cine was so good in
Yeah.
the title game, so consistent all year. I mean, he's borderline for. I just don't think you really know until what's noise and until they draft, and that's when everybody has to show their cards. But I loved watching him.
Well, and that's the issue. Like when anyone does a mock draft, I think you got to remember there's going to be trades. Like trades are going to happen. There are going to be some guys teams that are going to trade up. And I think what's interesting to think about in this draft specifically is, there's a lot of good, solid wide receivers out there that I think, whether it's Jameson Williams or some of these other guys, that you could see a team trade up and make some of those deals. Now, I think the quarterback position, I mean, let's just be honest, that's the one that always gets the attention. From an SEC standpoint, we know the guy all the eyes are on is Matt Corral, and I think where he goes, there's going to be such a wide range because
it's been such a roller coaster for his evaluations and everything for the last year.
And I think too, it's like, to me, the wild card is, I would say the draft starts at 2, but I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it starts at 1 because we don't know exactly what the Jags are going to do, even though we think we do. But like, let's, for instance, say like the Lions, they're at 2. If they were to, go quarterback, let's say they make a wild move here and decide to go quarterback at 2, which again, I can't blame them. The Lions are trying to do something to, maybe make a move here. It's not going to be Corral. I think if anything, it's going to be Malik Willis from Liberty is going to be the guy they would go to in that spot. So that is where, like, for someone like Corral, I think it's how you start to see the board fall because I don't know where he goes. To me, he's the biggest mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Whether he could go in the first round, could some of these again? I wouldn't be shocked if someone trades up to get him. I think there's been some talk like the Seahawks are at 9. I like Matt Corral, but I think taking him at 9 is. I think you could probably get him lower, and even if they were to trade back or something. But I mean, the Saints need a quarterback. They're at 16 and 19. I think he probably winds up going somewhere. I don't think he falls to the second round, but I tell you, he's a hard one to evaluate for me because it's all how the draft falls. It's all about team needs. But
Aaron Rodgers, you saw this with him.
Yeah.
You saw it with Deshaun Watson to a degree. I mean, that's the thing is quarterbacks are a 50-50 proposition in the first round anyway, more or less. And then you have a lot of teams that don't need them. I mean, used to be you would draft a quarterback, let him sit for 2 or 3 years, and then he'd play, and that's what Green Bay did with Aaron Rodgers. That ended up being one of the best draft decisions probably in the history of the draft. And I'm just sitting here thinking with Corral, could you see something like the Titans sitting there? They don't need a quarterback. The Titans always do something sort of strange. Ryan Tannehill's either got to get it together or they'll move on from him, I think, in a year. Do you see something like the Titans take him if he's sitting there near the end of the first round to sit him for a year or two and then let him be their guy? I mean, I wonder if it's something like them or another team doing that.
Yeah, what's interesting is we were talking about this. Like I do some NFL work elsewhere, and we were talking about this the other day. Is some of the mock drafts you see out there, people have the Titans taking someone like Sam Howell from North Carolina in that spot at 26. I think like the situation for Corral to me is I think he could go as high as 9th to the Seahawks. I think he could, like I said, go maybe in that 16 to 20 range. The Saints have 2 picks in there. I wouldn't be shocked if maybe that's a direction the Saints could go. They have several different needs, but I think it depends on how the board falls. But yeah, I think that's it because if you're really looking, and I've got my list pulled up here, if you're really looking at the teams that need a quarterback, like I said, the Lions are the obvious one at number 2, but they're not going to pick him second. The Panthers, they're at 6. They obviously have a quarterback situation. I think they wind up going with Kenny Pickett probably, though. I feel like that's probably the direction they go. Now, again, we never know about this stuff, right? Like it's just they can completely catch off guard. I know Corral met with the Falcons not long ago. They're at 8. I mean, you could see that, I guess. Because look, I mean, Matt Ryan's with the Colts now, and the Falcons. I think that's one that's interesting. If maybe I said he'd go as high as 9, maybe he goes as high as 8 to the Falcons because I think that they're a team that's basically starting over in terms of at the position, and so like that's where I think he's one of those kind of players. We always say like these are the players that will kind of define how the board falls because it depends on really just how much some of these teams love someone like him. Like I said, there are clear teams 6, 8, 9, Panthers, Falcons, Seahawks that all need quarterbacks. Washington's at 11. I don't think they go quarterback. They just got Carson Wentz, but I think they have probably a better scenario to go maybe wide receiver or offensive line, somewhere in there. And then beyond that, I really think the Saints are the team, which the Steelers too. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the Steelers are another team that just had their franchise quarterback, retire. So if I had to predict right now, I don't think Corral goes beyond 20 because that's where the Steelers are. Because after that, I think it's like, I just don't. I think there's a lot of other needs for the teams that are like 21 through 30. 32. And that's I think that's probably the range he goes in. It's just like I said, I think that's a pretty wide range, and he could be one of those guys that is a product of how the board falls, or maybe he's one of these guys we talk about that there's a team that's not in the first round or later in the first round that says, all right, he's our guy. How do we get him? And we make a couple picks to get up there, or we make a couple trades to get up there to get him in that spot. So,
how long does Evan Neal last? Not long.
Here's what I keep laughing about this, but like the Texans are the ultimate. I have no idea what the Texans are going to do, and you know exactly why. It's because they need everything.
Yes.
Like they have so many needs, and so like they could do anything at number 3, and I would not I probably couldn't blame them. They could pick any position at 3, and I'd be like, good job. Uh, Um, so I think that's it. I think he could definitely go third to the Texans probably, and I think there's some mock drafts out there that kind of feel like maybe that's going to be the direction they go in. He's a physical specimen as we know, and so I mean, look, if you're the Texans and you're trying to rebuild the entire foundation of the roster, you're going to start with the lines, is my guess. Offensive line, defensive line. And so I think it's probably come down. Will they pick Neal? Will they pick Kwanu from NC State? Another big tackle, or could they go defense if they get one of these guys that falls down? Like a Thibodeau, who is someone that you've seen a lot of different from Oregon, a lot of different guys projections for him. But I think they most likely go offensive line if that's the case. How far does he go if he's not picked at 3? I don't think there's any way he lasts beyond 5, because I think at that point you've got the Jets and the Giants who are both there. I think the Giants would be the ultimate landing spot for him. I don't, and that's the thing too, is the Jets and the Giants both, as of right now, both have 2 picks each in the top 10. So I think you're going to see the Giants are definitely going to go offensive line, and in one of those 2 picks, whether it's 5 or 7, or maybe they trade back. But I think Evan Neal goes no further than 5. I think it's probably the Texans or the Giants is where he winds up.
Jameson Williams. I mean, that's another wild card.
Yeah,
that's the don't get me started response.
Man, here's the one that, again, he's probably to the bigger degree. We talked about the Corral situation. I think that's just everybody's going to have split opinions on that based on what you think of him as a quarterback and knowing kind of the value of that position when you're making these picks in the first round. But I think Jameson Williams is someone that, well, it's again the NFL draft stuff I do. We did our mock draft, and with all of our guys picking, he managed to fall to 17, and that was to the Chargers. Now, again, that's all dependent on how some of this other stuff goes. Now, we had some trade ups, for quarterbacks and different players and stuff. So that is, again, if you're like, oh my gosh, there's no way this guy falls to 17. Well, you're looking at different scenarios like that. I mean, here's the deal. I think if he doesn't get injured, he's easily a top 10 pick, right? I don't think there's any doubt about that.
What your eyes told you with him, he was a guy that obviously got squeezed out of playing time at Ohio State, and you knew he had talent, and he was good to start the season, and then by the time we got past the midway point, you're just watching and going, nobody can stop this kid. I mean, he almost looked like one of the guys they had the year before, and that doesn't leave your mind if you're a scouting director, I'm sure.
No, and I think that's where, look, I don't think the Jets take him at 4, but I think if he were to still be there at 10, and let's say the Jets decide we're taking both these picks at 4 and 10, and we're not trading for someone who maybe wants to trade up, I think they would be sprinting to the podium to take him at number 10. Now, I may be wrong on that, but I think if you're the Jets, I don't know why you would not. Now, that's going to come into play, too, is the other wide receivers, which I just talked about. I don't think the depth in terms of wide receivers is as good in this draft overall, but I think you've got more depth on the lines, I think, than you do have at this position. So I think that's where if you really need a wide receiver, I think you have to get him now versus waiting, because I don't know kind of what that crop's going to look like. And look, I don't know. I've seen people have different opinions on how they value this wide receiver group in terms of future, Pro Bowlers. Some people think maybe none of these guys are going to be in that range. But I think that if you're looking for the guys with the highest upside, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that Jameson Williams is going to be in that discussion. You've got other guys in there as well, whether it's, you got the Ohio State duo of Wilson and Olave. Those 2 guys are in there. I mean, I think they both go in the top 20. You've got Drake London from USC is the other one that I was thinking about. But I still think the one with the highest upside could be Williams. And I'm not just saying that because we do an SEC show, but my guess is or I've even seen some people mock him to the Falcons at 8. Um, that would be interesting, but I think the Falcons have a lot of needs, and I mean that's could be one of them. But I I think it's just what do you value, right? And that's what I said. Like I could see him dropping a little bit if there are people that have injury concerns, just coming back from that type of injury, which we always say. I mean, you never know. There's no guarantees when you have an injury like that how you're going to come back. But I mean, he's still, there's no signs to believe that he's not going to come back and be just fine. So I think the Jets at 10 is an interesting spot if they're there. Beyond that, I think Washington at 11 could certainly use someone else to go with Terry McLaurin. That'd be quite a duo to have those two. But then, that's where we talk about like a team like the Texans who do have multiple picks here at 3 and 13. They could take anybody they can get at this point. So maybe they go Alabama duo. Maybe they go Evan Neal at 3 and Jameson Williams at 13, and they feel a lot better. But if he sneaks beyond that, which I don't think so, I mean, you're looking at the Saints, the Chargers, the Eagles, all three of those teams. There's no way any of those teams, 16, 17, and 18, are letting him go by at that point. My only wild card, and I teased this in the last thing we did, is if a team like the Chiefs, who, as we know, Tyreek Hill is now, Tyreek Hill's with the Dolphins, and so there goes your home run hitter. The Chiefs have 2 picks. They have the 29th and 30th pick. Could they package those picks perhaps to move up to 15 or somewhere like that, and then take him there or move up to whatever spot, maybe if they like him enough to move into that range? I've seen that presented, by some people. So injuries are always interesting because I think it's, like I said, if he doesn't have that injury, I think he is clear-cut top 10, top 8 pick probably. But I think when you add that aspect into it, I still think he's the best. The deep threat of all these players in the wide receiver range, I think he's the best in the group. And so that is going to, as we know in the NFL now, given that where things have gone from an offensive scheme standpoint, I think that is a clear-cut, valuable trait to have. And so I just don't see him falling. Again, if I had to make a prediction on this, even I think this is probably low. I don't think there's any way he falls beyond 17, which is where the Chargers are at. But I think there's probably a better chance that if he's there at 10, the Jets would take him in that spot.
So other receivers in this league that are probable top 100 picks, I guess we're looking at Wan'Dale Robinson and John Mechie, and that's it?
Well, Treylon Burks, I think.
Oh, Treylon Burks. I'm sorry, of course. That's the other one.
I don't remember if we mentioned him yet, but
yeah, Burks is I think he's
he can do everything.
High floor, right, low risk.
Yeah, and I think that's where someone like him, I think if you're the Packers, where are the Packers at? They're at 22. I think they would love someone like him because you can use him in different ways. I even think the Patriots, we know Bill Belichick, he likes his, hard-nosed defensive guys, and they're at 21. But I think if you have someone like that, for an offense that really needs kind of a extra something. I mean, Mac Jones played well, but they still need some kind of that oomph on offense. And so I think adding someone like him at 21 would be interesting, although I think Belichick probably goes defense on that. I think that to me is probably the range for Burks, 21 through 23, Patriots, Packers, Cardinals, because Cardinals don't need a wide receiver necessarily, but it's the Cardinals. And I mean, if you're talking about Cliff Kingsbury and what's he going to do, I think the Cardinals are always a team that could just make a wild pick because they value their offense so much. I mean, they've got Kyler Murray, they've got DeAndre Hopkins, but I mean, gosh, if you added a Burks to the mix, they lost Christian Kirk, where did he wind up? I think with the Jaguars. So yeah, I think that's, to me, sounds like a pretty good range for Burks. And like I said, I mean, this is all dependent on how the board looks right now and not necessarily what the board could look like. But I think those are 3 teams that I would circle and say, if there are 3 teams that are eyeing him, I think in that, that Patriots, Packers, Cardinals, the likelier scenario, probably the Packers or the Cardinals, that would love to have probably someone like him. But like I said, though, I think that's also too dependent on how where the other wide receivers go, the Ohio State duo and Drake London. I think they'll all be gone by that point. And I think right now most people think that Burks is probably beyond those guys, although I wouldn't say it's that far as some people seem to believe. I think he's right there in terms of the value he could add. I've seen the comparisons like to Deebo Samuel and those kind of things. Just someone they can use not just as your traditional wide receiver. They can use him in a lot of different ways. So I think he's an interesting one. George Pickens too. I think we talked about him earlier. I think he could be a nice value pick for someone depending on where he goes. You talk about Mechie, those kind of guys. Those guys will get plenty of opportunities, and I think that they will. They'll be nice contributors at the next level. I don't really have a lot of doubt about that. So,
corner. It was an interesting year in the league for corners. You've got Derek Stingley Jr., who didn't play most of the year. Frankly, has not graded very well at Pro Football Focus the last couple of years. Kyer Elam also sat out some time, didn't grade wonderfully himself a lot of last year. And that's Pro Football Focus. That's one opinion. It doesn't mean it's everything.
Yeah. But scouts love it.
But scouts love it.
They do love
and I mean, and we do too, because, other
Yeah.
than sitting there and spending all that time doing it yourself and having to learn it. And frankly, the one weakness with Pro Football Focus, among other things, and I'm not knocking them, you don't know what a guy's responsibility always is in a particular situation. So when you're watching it, you're guessing at it, I guess. Again, not to knock them, they do a valuable service that nobody else is doing, and it's very, very hard. But the other one, and I know I'm forgetting somebody. Roger Mccrary at Auburn, who is graded really highly at PFF. His whole career, doesn't get a lot of picks, but has done I think he's been about as steady as any corner in the country over the last 3 years. It just, not a playmaker, but you watch him play. I saw him a couple of games last year where you got the feeling after watching a few balls thrown his way early, teams weren't going to try him out a whole lot more. But that's three corners that could go in the first round.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting group because Stingley, I think, is sort of, man, I could see him going a lot of different places. Like, he's another one that I think it's, I've seen him even go like, people are like, well, if he's there at like 15 or something to the Eagles would be in love if they could get him at 15. I just don't think he's there at 15. I think he goes higher than that. Like you said, I think it's all a matter of health and kind of what you look at there in that scenario. But I think he's a top 15 pick. I won't keep adding the caveat end of trades and all that because you just kind of know at this point. But I mean, there are several spots. I mean, like we said, would I be stunned if the Texans were like, you know what, we want to go corner here, number 3? A little bit, because I think there's more value taking the offensive lineman there. Which, by the way, we'll get back to him in a second. But Charles Cross is someone else that I think could be the steal of the draft if he falls beyond like the top 10. I don't know if he does, because again, it's all about need. But if he were to fall beyond the top 10, I think he might wind up being like the biggest steal there is. I just think he's so good. And PFF
I think
his
graded him higher than Neal. Yeah.
Yeah, and as I say, I see a lot of people making that same case, saying, hey, if you're the Texans at 3 and you want to take an offensive lineman, you've got Ekwonu, you've got Neal, and you've got Cross. They're like, I would take Cross of that trio. So again, I wouldn't be that shocking if maybe that's what they decide to do. But that's where, like I said, you've still got the Giants and teams like that. The Giants specifically will go offensive line with one of their picks at 5 and 7 if they stay in both of those. So that's an interesting one. But I mean, Stingley to me is like, I mean, there's a lot of different teams that need help in the secondary. I mean, I think even the Seahawks at 9, like I said, I think the Seahawks are interesting because my guess is the Seahawks, I mean, really, they could go any SEC way they wanted to go here. I mean, they could go quarterback, like we said. They could go tackle if Charles Cross is there at 9, or they could go Stingley because they need help in the secondary. So those are all possibilities, I think, for the Seahawks. Jets, Vikings. Vikings are a team I would look at, in those kind of scenarios. If he's there at 12, Stingley, that is, that's a need for the Vikings. So that's another one that we haven't really talked about. But Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different teams in the top 15 that need help in the secondary. So I think he goes somewhere in there. It's hard to know exactly who to, but um, I've seen a wide range too on him. The others, I mean, I've seen Elam like being mocked to the Patriots at 21. That wouldn't surprise me. Like I said, Belichick loves guys defensively that he thinks will kind of fit the criteria for what they want to do. So I wouldn't be shocked about that one either. So.
First round guys we haven't talked about. I think Kenyon Green probably falls outside that. I think the move from tackle to guard, and I know A&M had issues, but you don't really want to see that. I don't think he's getting first round grades right now, is he?
I was gonna say I'm looking at my list here on the first round, probably guys, and I'm trying to look if there's anyone that we haven't talked about because I think everyone else. I mean, yeah, I'm like I don't really think that there's again we never know because we always we say this every year, but like there's going to be a couple teams that are going to make these picks that are just going to be like, whoa, where'd that come from? They're going to pick some guys that are valued in the 50s or the 60s, and they're going to pick them at 18 or something. So
Yeah,
I think
like
that's
somebody could fall in love with a James Cook or something like that and say, yeah, we'll take him late in the
yeah.
first round. So,
Well,
although
and that's
running
where,
back
like,
it's
too,
harder
like I
to
said, I
do,
think
but
Corral is the interesting one to me because I think there is a possibility he falls beyond the first round. Because I think it's all what you value. Like I said, it's system, it's what you value and those kind of things. So this is going to be a wild draft, but I think we've pretty much hit on all the SEC ones that I believe will go first round. I mean, I don't know how much we talked about Jordan Davis specifically, but I think he's one. We talked about all those Georgia guys, but I think Jordan Davis is kind of like the wild card pick here too, because you know, I said, I mean, I think that I understand the points of we talk about kind of how much he's on the field and those kind of things, but I think if you're an NFL team, and that's what we mean, like how do you value all the Georgia guys individually? I think Jordan Davis did so many things to help everyone else around him just because of his size and his ability that if you're an NFL team and you're like, all right, maybe he's, we don't know exactly. I think I've seen people say like one trick pony and all this other stuff, that's not my wording. That's just what they say. But I'm like, but boy, it's a really good trick, isn't it? Like,
yes.
it's one that's you will take every Sunday. And so I think that's the thing is like he will open up so much for a defense that there's going to be value in that. And I think that I keep going back to them, but like the Texans to me are a team that like I said, they've got what 2 picks in the top 13. I don't think they take him at 3 or anything, but I mean, he's still someone like, and you have to think about this too. I think for NFL teams, you play more than just divisional games, but when you really think about it, those are very important games. If you're the Texans and you're looking at this and you're thinking, boy, we really need to build our defense. Why? Because think about two of the running backs specifically you're going up against in the AFC South. Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor. It's like we need someone that can help us on the line to open up some things where we can try to stop, guys like that. And I think that's where you look at some of those teams, and that's where I see like a lot of possibilities. So I know I've seen different opinions on Jordan Davis, but man, I think it's just you cannot teach that size, as we always say. But I just think that it's not always just about what the player can do. It's about what can the player do for everyone else. And I think he's one of those players that would make things so much easier on them in terms of how they can game plan defensively. And so, yeah, I think he's another kind of fascinating one of this group.
He was incredibly difficult to quantify a year ago because when people were saying Jordan Davis should win the Heisman, I'm going, well, wait a minute. He's playing 35% of his snaps. It might have even been a percent or two less than that. And I just don't think you give the Heisman to a guy that plays that few snaps. On the other hand, Georgia had just crazy depth. And so, like, if Jordan Davis is playing somewhere else, then he's probably on the field a lot more. And then the other part of that, too, Blake, is all snaps aren't the same. I don't
Yeah.
think 2nd and 10 when you're up by 35. Yeah, I mean you rest Jordan Davis in that spot, I think. But when Jordan Davis is on the field, that's going to be 4th and 1, 3rd and 1. Those kind of plays where you know what may be coming and you're having to block him with 2 or 3 guys. And so even within that, the low snap count, there were a lot of a lot of stops along the way in determining how you evaluate him.
Yeah. And that's where I think, look, if he were to fall, I don't know. I'm looking at some of the teams here. I'm looking at the board I've got based on needs. I mean, if I'm trying to think like a team, Oreo would love if
Yeah,
Jordan
I had
Davis
muted the
falls
button. The
to
world's loudest dog is at it again.
big Jordan Davis fan. That's the way I heard it. So I think Oreo was saying something about Jordan Davis to the Ravens at 14. That's what I heard out of that. But um,
People
I mean,
cannot
that's
hear
what
this
like
because
I think
I'm muting it and only you can hear it. So you're
well,
hearing it a
that's
little bit,
funny.
but it is a sight to
He's
hear.
having a time. I think he's trying to make a trade. He's trying to get the Titans to trade up for somebody. Um, I don't know who he wants, but maybe tell him to speak up here. I'd like to know who he wants for the Titans to get. But yeah, so I think Jordan Davis one, like I said, I think he'll land in a top 15 spot. But my goodness, if he were to like fall to the Saints or something at 16, or even the Chargers, think about the Chargers, right? They're a team that they clearly got a stud quarterback now. They've got a great, well-oiled machine offensively. Boy, Justin Herbert were to add someone like that on the defensive side, maybe I don't think they need it, but I'm like at that point you're looking at value and you're thinking, man, what are the possibilities there? I don't think that happens. Like I said, I think the Saints and the Chargers are in spots to go offense there, especially if there are some receivers on the board or a tackle. Like I don't think Charles Cross falls down there, but it's possible. But we always say too, it's like you can look at what a team needs, but at some point there becomes the thinking that maybe we just have to take the best player on the board, even if it's not at a position necessarily that we feel like we need to address at the moment. You're trying to get the most value you can out of these picks. So um, that's a lot of value for Jordan Davis, someone that's at his size. So he'll be just fine, I think, for somebody.
If you're looking at other guys that could sort of unexpectedly fall into the first round, I'm guessing DeMarvin Leal might be on that list. Kingsley Enagbare at South Carolina. Both those guys played an unusually high number of snaps for defensive linemen, which I like that. That shows durability. Enagbare graded really well on PFF last year. Leal was just so-so. A good grade, not great, but again, played a ton of snaps. Or maybe Damian Pierce just because of the athleticism. I don't think he's going to go in the first round, but every team has got its own mind, and so I'm guessing if you're thinking of guys that we didn't cover, if someone slides in there, I mean, maybe Darian Kennard, although I don't think a right tackle is gonna do that.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to cover all our bases here.
He was going to be one, I'd say, but I think you've seen some people. I've just doing my reading and research, for all this. I think a lot of people kind of view him as maybe one of the more underrated players, but I think it's like he can still be underrated, but maybe not, be a first round guy. I think he's someone that I would probably, think about a little bit. I don't think it happens. Like I said, you're going to have some teams that are going to pop up and pick somebody you don't expect that maybe that's graded out in the 50s or 60s. But I think he's one that I find interesting because, it does seem like there are a lot of people who seem to think that he could be kind of one of those steals you get maybe in the second round or, somewhere in there. So, yeah, I think that barring what we don't know, right? And that's always the thing with the draft is there are just things you just don't know because that's where trades, if there are multiple trades in the top 15, and like I said, what's interesting is you've got some teams that have multiple picks in the first round, which always presents a dynamic that I think you can't predict in terms of, like we said, the Jets have multiple picks, the Giants have multiple picks, the Texans have multiple picks, the Saints have multiple picks. Who else? The Eagles have multiple picks. The Chiefs have multiple picks. These are teams that can package those picks, or somebody else can move in. I mean, let's think about like some of the teams that don't have a pick, like the Bears don't have a first round pick. Teams like that. So I think it's like when you're trying to predict who the players maybe that are going to jump up that aren't in that range right now, it's so hard because you never know what the board's going to look like 1 through 32 once the draft actually begins and the first round is over. So sure, you could see some of these guys on the outside maybe move in somewhere, but it's impossible to predict that just because you don't know what the board's going to look like from who's actually going to be picking where, just due to all the trades and that kind of stuff.
Anybody else worth discussion on the first round?
No, I think that's pretty much your consensus group there. I think of a lot of different guys, and as we said, some of those guys may not go in the first round. It's just these are the guys who are being in a position right now to where you're going to look at him and say, okay, I could see a scenario where he winds up in this first round, whether it's top 5, top 10, top 20, whatever. I think that's where it's at. And, as we always say, I think the quarterbacks drive things. If the Lions were to make a big pick at 2 and let's say go Malik Willis or something like that, that changes the quarterback portion of the draft because then you start to look at it. All right, well, where's the value from some of these other teams for a Corral or like I said, a Sam Howell or Pickett or those kind of guys. So I think from the SEC standpoint, a really good top tier offensive lineman group, I think, because again, you've got Neal, you've got Cross, those guys kind of leading the way on that. I mean, your defensive guys you got a lot of good defensive guys that you can pick from. As we said, I think you've got some good guys, not just on the lines, but the secondary too. And then I think, the wide receivers are interesting. I expect Williams and Burks to both go top 25, probably at worst. So I think it's a nice group of talent. As always in the SEC, you'll easily hit double digits in the first round. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So this is what you expect with this league at this point. So
lots of coverage coming. May do an SEC football video on Saturday, trying to get that together. We've not done a lot of spring football stuff. Keeping an eye on baseball. I watched both the LSU Missouri and the Ole Miss State games last night. Had some pitcher rankings we rolled out on the website yesterday, along with baseball power rankings, and doing hitters today. And we're doing this on Friday, so we'll have those at the website at Southeastern 14. Thank you for watching. Hit subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.